This is In Between Them, a podcast where we uncover what it really felt like to be a child of divorce. I am Shannon Darrow, and each episode brings honest stories from brave adults who lived through this as children. This is In Between Them. Let's get going. Hi, Autumn. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Shannon.
It's so nice to have you. You're so festive and cozy over there. So I want to start just by asking you a little bit about where you're at now and kind of just bring us up to speed on your life. And then we can go back as you share your story and kind of dig in to years ago.
Okay. Well, I was born here in Portland, Oregon, native Oregonian. I have two boys. They're 21 and 16. I was married, had my first son, divorced, met my second husband who adopted my son, and then after several, 15 years or more, divorced from him. So I'm twice divorced, but now I'm living the dream here in my cozy little cottage.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you. What I'd like to do is have you kind of take me back to when your parents were divorced and, how old were you? Did you have siblings? Because I think siblings have, a variety of different impacts on people's experiences with divorce. And just kind of share with me what you remember. At what point did you realize what was going on? I don't know if you were incredibly young, so you'd have no memories of that, but just kind of that beginning of realizing that you were from a divorced home or what that looked like.
Well, my parents were pretty young when they had me. I think they were 19 and 20 when they got married, and then I was born a year later when they were 20 and 21. And my mom talks about how, I think their relationship got a little bit contentious. My dad was from Idaho, and at one point they got in a fight. My dad left or something, and then that was it. She's like, I kind of feel bad that we never actually tried to work it out or resolve it. Wow. But it just kind of, I think, imploded on them. But they were young and got in a fight like young people do, and that was it. I was about 2, I think, when that happened. I think it's interesting because I don't know what that looked like really intimately, but I think that especially I was born in 1975. In 1977, I don't think it was common for the dad to feel like he got the kids. Yeah. It was just me. I was the only one. And so I think that it was just kind of just the way it was that my dad left and my mom had me, even though, she had to work and figure out. My grandparents watched me, I think, quite a bit. And I even remember at one point my mom was a bartender, and there was a little apartment above the bar with a big open vent thing that they would take off so that I could just talk down to my mom through the vent, probably when I was about 4 years old.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So, I know my grandparents helped quite a bit, but I think it was a struggle for my mom being so young and just trying to manage me on her own. And my dad, I don't think was in the picture very much in the beginning. I'm not even 100% sure if he had gone back to Idaho. I don't think he did. I think he still lived in the Portland area, and I think he saw me, but very sporadically. And I don't know how much my mom even let him take me in the beginning. And then, but I don't ever remember a time when I didn't feel like I didn't know who my dad was or want to see him. So I must have seen him frequently enough to want to see him and always know who my dad was. And I have little kind of wispy memories. My dad remarried a couple years later. And so I had a stepmom that I vaguely remember because he wasn't married to her for too long. But when I realized that my parents were divorced, my mom had remarried too. And my stepdad was great. He was really good to me. And so I had a stepdad that I called Dad. And then I remember my mom says I was maybe 6 years old where it dawned on me, wait a second. I have a dad a real dad, and then I have this stepdad. Like, my parents are not, they're divorced. Like, having this kind of epiphany,
Mhm.
4 or 5 years after the fact, and then going through a lot of grieving after the epiphany. So
Interesting.
it feels like, I didn't, it's like my parents' divorce affected me the most when I was around 6 or 7.
Right.
And I was really upset about it,
What Go ahead.
even though they were both already married.
Yeah. What did that grieving look like at that age?
Well, I remember it being highly dramatic. I mean, I was upset and crying a lot, wanting to talk, talking to my dad on a rotary phone, wanting my dad so bad. And then confused because I loved my stepdad and he was good to me and I
Yeah.
had a pretty happy life, but I missed my dad so much. He might have been out of Oregon at that point, or maybe he moved around quite a bit. And I think what part of what had happened is when I did see my dad, he's passed away now, but he was really, really good to me when I saw him for these brief periods of time. And so in my little childhood head, I just felt like those were the best moments of my life and I wanted more of them. So I was constantly longing for him. Even though as an adult looking back, I realized my dad was so guilt ridden about not seeing me very often that when he did see me, it was like it was on. Like I was a princess. Like he
Wow.
treated me so well. And that in itself was, I think, confusing, where it made me, I always said I wanted to live with him. I wanted to be with my dad. I missed him so much. I mean, one of my most traumatic memories of my entire childhood was my dad was living in San Diego. He would fly me there maybe twice a year. And this was back, when airports were much less restricted. And I was probably 8 years old the first time I flew by myself to San Diego. And this was after the visit. My dad, he'd put me on the plane. So we would, we'd go to the gate. He would get me on the plane. I'd go on first because I was a kid traveling alone, get me all buckled up. And I would be getting really more and more emotional as this was happening. And then I would start crying like hysterically on the plane. I wouldn't let my dad go. I would be like calling for him down the aisle, Dad, no, just screaming and crying. I'm only 8 years
Wow.
old, but I was so upset about having to leave my dad. And I mean, that must have been awful for him too, because
Yeah.
he's like basically like, it's like leaving your kid at preschool when they're 3, but I'm an 8-year-old on a plane.
Yeah.
And it usually like a flight attendant would come sit with me and rub my back and try and calm me down. And I would say I was probably in 30 before I could tell that story without crying. Like I would be reliving that grief. And it happened, not just the plane one is like the one that really stuck out in my
Yeah.
mind, but it was always like that on the trade-offs because it typically was I'd see my dad at Christmas time, at spring break, and in the summer.
Okay.
And the send off when my dad finally moved back to Idaho was always at the Denny's in Pendleton. That's where we always met. And I mean, I associated that Denny's with, yay, I get to see my dad when we're heading east with my mom. But then as we're heading west with my dad for the send off, it was like, even, 100 miles in, I'd start getting really upset and crying and just really sad about not getting to see my dad again and having to leave my dad.
How would that transition to your mom be after, like the plane, for example, by the time you got back to Portland and see your mom, or at the Denny's when you
Mm-hmm.
said goodbye to your dad and had the emotions and then you transitioned to your mom, how was that for you and your mom?
I think it was kind of this, probably this like climatic experience, like where I'm so upset, but then I calmed down. I mean, it was what I was used to. It was having these huge. The transitions were horrific, but I think I'd be kind of somber for a couple days, and then transitioned back to my old life until it happened again in, 3 or 4 or 6 months. And I think it was hard on my mom. And I think that she kind of went back and forth between almost trying to like tell me things that my dad did that weren't great so that I liked him less,
Yeah.
which was a little messed up on her part.
Yeah.
But I think, but also there was this part of her that was, I think, as an adult looking back, realizing that she, for one, had to kind of protect me a little bit because I wanted to live with my dad so bad. But I think my mom realized that real life with my dad wouldn't be like visits with my dad.
Yeah.
She, was always worried that like he didn't have a lot of stability, moved around a lot, didn't have health insurance, those kinds of things where, she could see that. Those things didn't matter when I was on vacation with
Right.
him.
Yeah.
And all that mattered was that he really just was so good to me and, you know, kind of spoiled me. And so
Yeah.
that was the basis of that relationship. I mean, my
Was
dad
there
died when I was in my 40s.
Okay.
I was just going to say, and he'd gotten mad at me one time in my entire life.
Wow.
One time I remember my dad raising his voice with me in 40 something years.
Wow. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is there a time that it shifted, or was it always that seemingly wonderful with your dad? Did you ever get a perspective, not like your mother's, but see things more clearly, or did it always stay like that?
There was a shift, and because I went through a pretty dark period mental health wise as a probably 9 through 12. And a lot of that was all based on this relationship with my dad that I kind of fantasized about and didn't get to have. And my mom, in a messed up way of trying to tip the scales a little, would again like tell me bad things about my dad and complain about my dad never paying child support.
Mm.
I heard about it all the time. My dad never paid child support. He owed her so much money. Well, in my kind of underdeveloped brain, I kept thinking, how am I going to get my dad out of this bind? Because it was starting to get to like, oh, my dad might get in trouble with the law. He might lose his driver's license for not paying. And as a 10, 11, 12 year old, I'm trying to figure out how to solve that problem for my dad. And at one point, like, and I think I was just a really, sensitive, emotional, I probably had some mental health issues as a kid. I thought, well, I could kill myself. He doesn't have to pay if I kill myself. And this was probably around 12. And I really did start to kind of fantasize a little bit about that, like getting my dad out of that bind that my mom was putting him in. And my mom found out about it and took me to this child psychiatrist. And she was like, tough love. And she was like, no nonsense, like, your dad has a financial responsibility to you just like anyone else. I mean, she was not soft with me at all. But it was that was what broke through to me, where I finally stopped like idolizing my dad. I still loved him. I was still had a lot of that same transitional traumas and stuff. But it got me out of that like feeling like I had to solve that problem for my dad. It got me out of that like deep, it just took me out of it a little bit. And it was really
Yeah.
her tough love. She was not nice to me at all, but she's just like, what is going on with you to think that your dad as an adult shouldn't have a fiscal responsibility to help support you? Why do you
Mhm.
think that?
Yeah.
And honestly, like, that worked.
Well, you were operating on an adult topic, and I feel that she probably was like, I need to relate to you in an adult way about this because you know what I mean, or at
Mm-hmm.
least in a mature way that was more mature than your age was, but you were already there,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of you're worried about child support. So I guess we're going to now talk about the reality of child support, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, thank God for that woman and for your mom bringing her into your life so that you could not continue down that path. I
Yeah.
mean, and not the path of thinking your dad is wonderful, but the destructive, scary mental health side of that
Yeah.
path that, could have been terrible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I really have a lot of gratitude for that woman, whoever she was. I didn't see her for very long, but
Yeah.
I think my mom was kind of coming from this place of wanting me to like her better than my dad.
Yeah.
And really, that was a lot of what it was about, is this kind of competition for my love. My dad wasn't, he just felt guilty and wanted to, and he did really love me and wanted to make up for it the times that he did see me.
Hmm.
And he wasn't really, didn't have a lot of, he was young, didn't have a lot of parenting skills besides, oh, be really nice to someone.
Hmm.
You know, it's funny how we look back at how we were parented and we are like, dang, he really was a like practically teenage boy taking care of me.
Yeah.
You know, there was, I mean, I remember, luckily he had wives most of the time, but I remember a summer being with my dad where, like, I probably spent a month with my dad when he was a single. And I mean, it was like I ate hot dogs like the entire time. I just melted like chocolate chips with cornflakes for dessert. I mean, he tried, he'd take me out to eat, but he was really fun and and pretty immature.
Yeah.
Um, and really, you know, like I knew things about my dad's life that probably shouldn't. Like he had a wife and a girlfriend at the same time, and I knew and had a relationship with both of them and knew to not talk about one around the other. You know,
Wow.
this is like as a 7, 8 year old, you know?
Yeah.
So I think my dad didn't, he was really emotionally immature, but loved me so much and just wanted to make me happy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was tough for my development.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many pieces to that that are tough for it. And I mean, when you look back,
Mm-hmm.
looking back, as a grown woman, but seeing all of the layers you know, I would love to say what could have been a better way, but it took your parents to potentially be different. And
Mm-hmm.
with your dad moving around, I mean, if you're getting on flights, I don't, you want to say you needed a little bit more of a realistic awareness potentially that maybe would have decreased your emotional trauma around the transitions. However, in a way, it's a beautiful thing that you thought your dad was as amazing as he was because that's your dad and that is a great feeling to have had, versus a child who's screaming because they
Yeah.
don't want to go, So you have a total opposite
Right.
reaction where kids are traumatized because they don't want to be with a parent. And yet you're still
Yeah.
thrown into this mental health situation because of it. And, I mean, if you think back, is there a way that it could have been handled differently for you? Or do you kind of feel like that was just the way it was going to be? There was no other way because of the circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how it could have gone differently. I think it's because, and, you know, I like to think of my glass half full too. I think I really felt so unconditionally loved by my dad. And that is something that is, you know, not everybody gets to experience that. I felt so loved. I felt so important to him. The funny thing is that, you know, looking back, I think, well, you know, he made me feel that way when we were present with each other.
Yeah.
But the, you know, I didn't see him like enough. It's pretty easy to judge him now, being like, well, then why didn't you see me more? Why
Yeah.
didn't you call me more? Because those things didn't happen. And back then, it wasn't like you could FaceTime. Who knows what it would be like nowadays? It's easier to stay connected. But with my dad moving around a lot, you know, it was always up to him to reach out to me. I don't know how much my mom encouraged the relationship, or I don't think she called and said, "Are you going to see Autumn?" Or, you know, it was kind of always up to him because my mom had created stability for me. She'd married someone that was stable. I, you know, had step siblings from my stepdad, but then my mom and my stepdad had a kid. So we just had kind of this like normal family over here where, and then I would get kind of sucked out of it to this a little more, you know, seeing my dad situation. And it was tough because I The older I got, the more I had question like I was I worried about my loyalties because I called my stepdad dad. I went by my stepdad's last name. And when I was in school and different things, I was always my stepdad's last name. But then in the summers, because I'd spend a month or two with my dad in the summer, I'd have to remember now I'm going by my other name.
Oh, wow.
I'd almost have to like change my identity to, I was either Steve's kid or Larry's kid. Like, whose kid was I in
Yeah.
this time period? Always worried about referring to my stepdad as my dad. Like, oh, well, then my dad did this one thing. I always was like hyper conscious of accidentally saying something like that
Hmm.
when I was with my real dad. Yeah. So, and it went both ways. I was really thankful for my stepdad. He was a great dad, but also worried about hurting his feelings if I talked about my real dad too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that kids, those are like these little things that carry so much weight that I don't think
Yeah.
parents, unless they lived it, actually understand. And sometimes I think if we communicated about that, would that have taken that burden of worry off of you? Like if both the dads had said,
Yeah.
"We know you switch your name. It's totally not a big deal. To us, we love Autumn. Whoever Autumn is, she's ours," and like kind of
Yeah.
diffuse that a little bit. I'm
Right.
finding as I'm talking to people
Right.
that when there's no communication around something that a child's worried about, it becomes so much bigger. And sometimes it's because the parents are not good communicators, but sometimes it's just because it does not dawn
Mm-hmm.
on the parents that it is hard on the child. And so
Right.
again, it's giving that lived experience perspective that, like, hey, sometimes just talking about this will make it easier for this kid. And if we can
Yeah.
mitigate some of the little things, then the big picture of impact is going to be a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you kind of said that was up until 12, where you kind of had that instance with the therapist and got a little bit of a changed
Mm-hmm.
perspective on your dad. What
Yeah.
transpired
Yeah.
after that with that different perspective as you moved forward?
Well, I think that I, I, I don't think a ton changed aside from the fact that I realized that the child support issue was not my issue to deal with, and that my dad, could deal with his debt however he felt like it. It wasn't my fault. Child support wasn't my fault, which is what I felt.
Yeah.
So being relieved of that burden was helpful, but I still struggled with transitions. I think less because I was getting older. I think I was still like weepy, but not like having really big emotional breakdowns during the transitions. But I started to almost feel like another dynamic shift was I wasn't reaching out to my dad either. And then I would feel guilty about that. I almost felt like now, the older I got, the more I had to be 50-50 in making the relationship happen, and I wasn't doing that, even though my dad was never good at calling me and checking in.
Yeah.
But then the older I got, the more I felt like I should be meeting in the middle. I should be calling him too. And then I wasn't. And then I would feel super guilty about it. And months would go by and hadn't talked to my dad. And then I'd feel guilty and I'd almost like awkward calling him because it'd been so long. And then I started to like carry the weight of like, is this my job to keep
Mhm.
this connection?
Yeah, it almost sounds like because your parents were so young and then divorced with you so young, that as you got kind of more aware and older, it's like you took on the co-parenting with your dad rather than your mom co-parenting for you in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Feeling that responsibility that shouldn't be your responsibility. There should be things in place, or it should be known, or it should be communicated between the adults. But you are the one kind of
Mm-hmm.
taking on the other side between you and your dad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, and it did feel like a lot to carry.
Yeah.
And then at this point, when I was 13, my dad had another kid, a
Wow.
daughter, and then another one 4 years after that. So I had, and my dad, there's a weird dynamic with my stepmom and my dad and I, because he really loved me and he showed a lot of love for me and would say, like, I don't want any more kids. Autumn's enough. And he had married someone quite a bit younger who wanted kids. And he would always say, nope, Autumn's enough. I don't want any, I don't want. But then I think that created a little resentment. Like, there's been times now as an adult where she would make comments of, like, everyone behave, the princess is coming. Or,
Yeah.
like she has made some comments about how, my dad would be like, make it known that I was the most important thing to him over her, over the other kids, or everything. That's kind of how she implied. And I think a lot of that's just based on his guilt for not being the dad he felt like he wanted to be with me.
Yeah.
And so then he overcompensated. I mean, these two younger siblings, we talk about how we had completely different dads, even though he was the same actual man. The way he treated me, that was, I think, propelled a lot by his guilt, versus the way he had them. He was their regular daily dad, and they got in trouble for not picking up their messes, but he also went to their parent teacher conferences and their baseball games. He never saw one of my baseball games, never even knew where I went to school. He didn't have that relationship with me, but he also never once yelled at me my entire life.
Yeah.
He, so it was like this pay, this trade where it's like, yeah, I got this guy that just unconditionally adored me, and they got a regular dad, and he seemed like a completely different person to both both all of us.
I mean, it must be so hard, good, fascinating when you guys are together and reference him, because it is like two different people, but yet you guys almost can learn a little bit about the version that you had or they had, to kind of fill in gaps.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, I
Yeah.
mean, but also again, so back to your point of the princess is here, it's another piece of something that you have to carry, but it has nothing to do with you. So it's just one more
Yeah.
aspect of what parents are putting on children that lasts so long. I mean, I don't know if it's still happening
Mm.
today in when you're 50, but my guess is it happened for long enough into your adulthood, probably, that it was something that was just a part of the family dynamic, which, is not something that somebody wants to be reminded of every time they walk in the door, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and a really unusual turn of events happened when I was 19. So I'd never lived with my dad. When I was 19, those siblings were maybe 2 and 6, and I was like 19, living my best life. Just I was kind of crazy, having a lot of adventures, and I got a phone call from my stepmom one day that said, we need your help. Your dad's really sick. He's getting a liver transplant, and your dad and I have to go out of state for this liver transplant. We want you to come here and take care of your sisters.
Wow.
And so I did. I mean, I was 19. I dropped everything and moved to really rural Idaho, and yeah, and waited for my dad to get that liver transplant. So it was the first time I got to live with him and the siblings, but they were still pretty young at the time, 2 and 6, my stepmom. And it was probably maybe 6 months, no, less than that, 4 months of just, on pins and needles, waiting for his little pager to go off. Yeah, but it was the first time I'd ever lived with him. And yeah, and then he got the page that they had a liver for him. And him and my stepmom, got on a medevac. I drove him to the airport with signs that said, police escort, please, as we're
Wow.
driving 100 miles an hour to the airport to get my dad on this medevac to fly to a different state for a liver transplant. And then I came home and took care of like two little kids for over a month by myself, like with no parenting experience.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That is
it was
incredible.
interesting.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, what
it was
what
a big
an
adventure, but it
yeah,
was,
I bet. In a way, you probably got a little bit of a glimpse as to what your mom had to do with you, you know? I mean, age-wise and
yeah,
with those young kids.
mm-hmm,
I mean, when you're not
yeah,
ready for it, you know? I mean, what a
yeah.
fascinating perspective.
It was interesting, and it was just interesting to live with my dad and live with my stepmom and
Yeah.
get
What
to
did
know
you
them
learn?
from like a not the princess version of
Right.
me.
Yeah, yeah. What did you learn from that time period that you feel like you never would have been aware of if you hadn't had that experience?
Mm, Well, for one, I thought it was like the absolute best birth control that any young person could have is to be like thrown into a parenting situation that you were not anticipating because it's so hard. And it just really made me think, like, oh, yeah, I am not ready for this on my own. And, it was a little bit different too because at that point my dad was really sick. So everything was different. Everyone acted differently. We didn't know if he was going to live. So things were very different, but it was still like I still felt like his favorite person in the world. And it was good to have that time with him. That was But also I think the older I got, the more reality I saw that my dad was kind of had a lot of his own mental health problems, probably had been like a borderline functioning alcoholic his entire adult life. He, I think, had a lot of depression. So I think that you get to see somebody from adult eyes, somebody that I idolized. I mean, like put on such a big pedestal that I thought about ending my own life to make his better.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was interesting to just see him a little more real, a little
Mhm.
more flawed. But I think I still intentionally chose to see him the way I always had.
Yeah. Yeah. How did your relationship with your mom evolve as your relationship with your dad kind of took all these turns? Or was that just always this stable place for you?
Um, no, I think I had, especially my teenage years were really difficult with my mom. There was a lot of I want to live with my dad talk, and my mom just wasn't going to allow it. And looking back, I think, well, honestly, she probably couldn't have stopped it. My dad could have. So I think that it was maybe my dad stopped it without me realizing it, because I wanted to live with him so bad. When I was 16 years old, he could have just said, yeah, come live with me.
Yeah.
And it's funny to see, like, oh, why did we all assume that my mom had the power to say no? She
Yeah.
probably didn't. It wasn't like he was a felon or a drug addict or anything that would have kept him from legally being able to get me.
Yeah. Was there ever an attempt by
So,
you
yeah, my
to
mom
stay with
and I
him?
had a very contentious.
Yeah. No.
My mom always said no, and I was just like, okay, I can't.
Hmm.
And maybe there's a part of me that realized that the reality of living with him wouldn't be what I thought it was going to be. And I just let my mom say no because then I never had to say no.
Yeah.
I never had to be like, no, actually, I don't want to live with my dad.
Yeah.
They had less money. My dad and my stepmom were always kind of financially struggling. And another kid would have been hard, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten to do some of the stuff that I'd gotten to do when I lived with my mom. But
Yeah.
letting her say no kept me from ever having to say no. No, actually, that's not
Yeah.
what I want to do.
When you think back on that now, what are your feelings about that? Because if it was so contentious then with your mom, but maybe there was a bigger situation going on, either it was allowing you to have this kind of almost like a barrier to being the one to say no, but also it would probably not have been maybe the best situation for you, and she knew that. Do you what do you think when you
Mm-hmm.
look back on that now? Because it sounds like it was a deep, deep want for you. You know, it wasn't like you kind of flippantly said, I'll go live with my dad. Like you really, really, really wanted to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, looking back, I'm glad that my mom didn't say, "Yeah, do it. See how you like that," which she could have done,
Yeah.
because it probably wouldn't have lasted. I probably would have come back. But I think she protected me from that. I don't know if my mom did that intentionally. I think she just did not want me to live with him. I don't think that she had that forethought of like, I don't want her bubble burst. I think my mom would have been happy to have my bubble burst about my dad.
Yeah.
I think it was more about like she just did not want me to, she wanted me to live with her.
Yeah.
I think that she kind of was you hear about teenagers that have a baby so something loves you. I think that that's kind of, my mom kind of was like seeking something that really loved her, and that was me. So I think that she was dependent on me. She wanted me to need her and love her, and yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever talked
So I
about that?
feel like, I've always been this talked about it with my mom.
Yeah.
Mm, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that, um, yeah, I don't think that she has the same kind of perspective as I do. I think, there's potentially she's got big emotions too. And I think probably her emotional maturity um, isn't quite up there. I think it would be probably a tough conversation to have with little
Yeah.
productivity. So I don't think it would benefit our relationship.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, and I guess good to be aware of that because you can do what you need to do for you. You don't need her necessarily to get there,
yeah.
especially if you know that it's going to be that way, you know? Probably, I'm sure, like most
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
you would wish it was different, but like we wish lots of things were different, you know? We can't create that.
Yeah.
Is there a point so you lived with your dad when you were 19 and you spent that month with the kids and then came
Hmm.
back to your life. After that, so now you're an
Hmm.
adult, is there still ongoing conflict or are you now, I would say, freer because you get to go and kind of create your own life at this point? Like what was there a shift at that point or did it continue to be really difficult and traumatic in instances as you became an adult?
Well, in different ways, I think it became difficult because instead of worrying about like, the parenting plan part of it, say, or of like, when am I going to see my dad again and stay with my dad again? I was an adult. So it was really more up to me. I had more control over that. But then at this point, I'm like, now I'm facing my dad's mortality. So now I'm like, is this the last time I'm going to see him? Those were the hard questions I had to ask myself when I did see him. So I went from worrying about when I was going to see him next because I was a kid and I didn't have control over it to wondering if I'm going to see him again because he was in poor health.
Mhm.
And so I remember I had some really tough times leaving him, not sure if I'd see him again. Those were really, really tough. I was really scared. My dad ended up living another 25 years after his liver
Wow.
transplant. So he was around for a long time, but in and out of really, really, really poor health. But I remember once, this was when I was married to my second husband, and my kids were little. We had gone there for Christmas to see them, and my dad wasn't doing great. He ended up getting a kidney transplant too and was on dialysis and just really rough health pretty much the rest of his life. And I remember driving from Idaho back to Portland and getting, a couple hundred miles away from my dad's. And all of a sudden, I had this meltdown of I didn't take any pictures of the kids with my dad. I might never have this chance again. And just crying so hard. And it was not even that, like, oh, am I not going to see my dad again? But it was like, I forgot to take pictures. I may never get
Yeah.
to take pictures with my kids in my dad's lap ever. And I was just bawling to the point where I even wanted Andy to like turn around and drive back. So just so I could take a picture with my kids on my dad's lap.
Wow.
So that's kind of how things shifted, is just worrying about that.
Yeah. Constant worry, but in many different ways, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it was always about not seeing him again.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is like a constant loss. You know what I mean? Whichever way you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at it,
Yeah.
but it's you were always
Yeah.
navigating this feeling of potential loss, you know?
Yeah.
Do you do you
And
feel
deep grief, like
yeah,
deep
yeah,
grief.
yeah. Do you feel that you see that in other ways manifest in your life?
Loss.
Yeah. The worry and the
Yeah.
fear of
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah. I would think that that would be
Yeah. I think
something.
I worry sometimes about my own kids, to, never not wanting, like struggling with not wanting my own kids to leave.
Mhm.
I have a 21-year-old that's back home right now. And, there's this part of me that's like, well, if he could learn to keep things a little cleaner, I'd want him to live with me forever, not wanting to lose that, like
Yeah.
not, worrying about that.
Yeah.
When I got divorced, this last divorce, worrying about, him not being with me, what that was going to be like. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think having really two very different experiences with your mom and your dad and having that kind of like very extreme experience with your dad and then this kind of more stable with your mom, how did that impact your own parenting?
Well, I think on both sides, on my mom's and my dad's, I think I more leaned into the things I think they didn't do well and tried to correct that versus trying to do the things that they did well, trying to recreate it. I feel like I was more trying to correct things.
Interesting.
My mom like I said, had big emotions. So trying to be less reactive, never wanting to be a screamer. And probably let my kids, I might be too easy on my kids because I feel like I was trying to be a gentler parent. Um, and then with my dad, I mean, like just trying to be more regularly present and realizing like how much that just kind of normalizes a relationship, because my relationship with my dad was so, you know, amazing when we were together and then devastating when we weren't. And just both of those extremes were just
Yeah.
tough to navigate.
Yeah.
Where I think the key is presence. If we're just there, we don't feel the need to be like super amazing or the opposite. And so, always being there with my kids,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
presence, I think is so important for stability and regularity, just keeping things
Yeah.
on plane.
What about with your intense emotions around transitions and then having not so much your second son, because I think he was older when you got divorced, but your first son who was younger. But even still, considering your second child also, did it make you more sensitive to their transitions with parents after divorce based on your own circumstances?
Well, I think that I really just wanted to. He was 13 when we got divorced, and I think I really wanted to. It was a struggle for me, really, because I wanted to let him kind of kind of have some control over what his new life was going to look like. But I also just wanted him with me. So it's like, you can have control over your new life if that means you want to be with me all the time. And so that was a hard one because it was constantly trying to remind myself to be emotionally mature in this situation and not let my own feelings of not wanting to lose my son, that loss, that abandonment feeling, not letting that pop up if he wants to spend more time with his dad, because he's safe with his dad. There wasn't really any reason why he couldn't spend a lot of time with his dad, aside from the fact that I wanted him to want to be with me more. And having that firm conversation with myself about, like, really need to put, like, he's the kid, like, let's put his needs first and really try and, like, suss out what he really wants, because he's going to try and make everyone happy. And how are we going to figure out what he really wants so that his true needs are being met? Not his needs of just making his parents feel good,
Right. Right.
but his authentic needs. And even figuring out what that was and is still hard.
Do you think that you are more, I mean, the layer of you with the loss would be difficult to reconcile against giving him freedom, like you said. But have you felt that you're maybe better at it because you don't want to avoid, or you want to avoid potential trauma and extreme reaction off of, and not that he's not young potentially, so you might not get that like kicking and screaming tantrum, but the impact. And so does that make you more willing to take a step back and go, all right, I would love to fight this out for a different end, but I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
because I know more, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, definitely. I definitely feel like there's some internal restraint where this kind of emotional part of me wants to just, like, hang on to his leg and not let him go to his dad's house. And then there's this other part of me that reminds myself that, I want him to navigate his life in a way that makes him happiest, as long as it's safe for him and his needs are being met. And it still bothers me to this day when I feel like he's saying stuff because he thinks it's what I want to hear or he wants to make me happy. Like, I really want him to not be as much of a people pleaser as I was. I was to the extreme with my dad. I was a perfectly well-behaved child because I wanted my dad to want me more, to see me more. I mean, he never yelled at me because he really never had a reason to, because I really did act like the perfect little girl for him. And I don't want that for my son. I can tell sometimes where he's like saying, "Yeah, mom," because he just wants to make me happy. And, I want him to, like, recognize and honor his own wishes.
So in that moment where you see that he's doing something to please you, how do you lovingly confront that to try and make him see he doesn't have to? Or is it something that's really difficult to do?
I mean, I try, but it's like yeah, I think he kind of makes up his mind that this is how he's going to handle this situation. Now, he gives it away a little bit with tone. It's funny because it's like he doesn't want to completely, like, I think he wants a little bit of, like, I'm going to say what I think, you want to hear, but I'm going to give a little bit of a tone change so that that to maintain a little bit some of his own identity. And so I can tell sometimes, and I do try and call him out on it and be like, what is it that you really want? But it's been interesting because at first I was really worried about, like, him wanting to be with his dad all the time, and then there was kind of this shift of where he wasn't wanting to go over there. And at that point, I had kind of started to get used to having a couple nights off a week and was dating and doing different things. And then he's like, oh, and originally I had said, if you don't want to go, you don't have to go. That was my initial, like, the way that I voiced it. And that was probably me wanting to be loved by him, wanting to be his favorite parent. And so I was giving him a lot of that freedom. And then they came a point where I didn't want to do that anymore. And now I think, oh, I already kind of started. It's hard to go back on.
Yeah.
It's hard to go back on. No, you have to go to your dad's. You go to
Yeah.
your dad's every Tuesday. You have to go to your dad's. When I originally said, no, you never have to go if you don't want to. It
Yeah.
wasn't like he wasn't safe or, there was no reason why. I think the times that he didn't want to was just because, well, all my stuff's here, my toys are here, my friends are in this town. Like, yeah, I don't really want to.
Yeah.
But it wasn't because it wasn't about either one of us parents.
Right.
It was
Right.
about he preferred his environment at my house
Right.
and he preferred the town and the friends and all of those things.
That
So
that
it was
is
hard
a
to make the switch
yeah.
back.
That is a thread I'm hearing is kids. There are many dynamics where kids have different relationships with the parents, but there is something that I'm seeing where kids like the one spot and they want to stay in that
Mm-hmm.
spot, and it doesn't have anything to do with the parent, but you a lot of times I feel like that gets lost
Mm-hmm.
and then is a conflict creator
Yeah.
because either it's not believed or it's not obvious or people can't accept that. And I find that to be a real challenge for people to help
Mm-hmm.
reflect that need in kids a little bit, and see that it is a location
Yeah.
issue. It is not a parent issue. And what can we do
Yeah.
around that, And you said one other thing I want to point out, and then I have one more question for you, and then I will let you go on with your day. But you said how in the beginning you said to him, you don't have to go if you don't want to. And, that was maybe more of an internal thing for you. And then it was so hard for you. But then you kind of started to have your own life during the time he was away. And then he came back and, or he stopped going as much. So that shifted. But I think that that is a lot of parents and probably more moms, but parents in general, when you unravel a unit of a family and you don't want your child to go because you don't know what you're going to do. And then you're forced to fill that time.
Mm-hmm.
You're forced to discover yourself or
Mm-hmm.
get yourself back out there. And then you find that you're actually okay, and you would never say that you're okay in a sense that, like, I don't want to be with my kid, but I am existing okay when they go do this. And I think there's a lot of people that don't ever
Mm-hmm.
think they're going to get there, or they don't let
Yeah.
themselves get there. And so again, another kind of like conflict creator when you don't open yourself up to that possibility that you can actually have this rich life on the one night or 3 nights or one afternoon that your child goes with their other parent, and
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. You're gonna be okay about
Yeah.
it. I think if people could see that more, they might navigate to that point a little bit better or calmly or peacefully or in a more excited
Yeah.
way, kind of seeing that as
Mm-hmm.
another step for them just in their life journey. And that it's maybe good
Yeah.
for everyone, but I know how hard that step is, So I
Yeah.
I just think that was a really great reminder of that difficult transition for the parent, as we're talking about the kids,
Mm-hmm.
kids, kids, and all of that. But like that is a piece of it, and it does reflect on the child, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and then the guilt I would feel if I did say make plans on a night when he's normally with his dad,
Yeah.
and then he says, "You said I don't have to go if I don't want to," and then I'm like, "You do." That's
Yeah.
tough
Yeah.
because I don't want him to ever feel like I didn't want him,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because in that traditional nuclear family, I would be his mom 7 nights a week, and of course I still am. But now it's starting to I'm exploring my own identity outside of being a mom on
Mhm.
the nights maybe when he's not here, which might happen. It probably happens a little sooner for us divorcees than people that Kids
Right.
live with them 24/7 until they're out of the nest.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So it is, in a way, what you're saying, a natural progression. It's just, it comes at an unnatural time when you are divorced.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. And then with
Yes.
that comes all
And
this
then we feel
judgment.
guilty about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So my last question to you, as we've navigated and talked about lots of difficult things, can you look back at all of this and now, as you know, where you're at in life, what would you say is maybe the greatest positive impact that all of this has had on you? Is there one thing that you can say, you know what, this would have not happened without this, and I'm thankful for that?
Well, I mean, like I said, I try and look at this cup half full, and I try and pick out the things that I think brought the most value to my life. And, I think that I always felt like so unconditionally loved by my parents, even though there was lots of ups and downs. I always really felt special and loved. And I think that's what I carry through as a parent is I think those are the things that, I really, even when my parents made parenting mistakes, I always think, well, there was something about what they did that came from love, like love for me. They might have made a mistake, but a lot of their decisions were based on love for me, even if they stumbled. And I just want my kids to feel that way. I do want them to think that, like, yeah, I mean, maybe my mom wasn't perfect, but I know for a fact that she always loved me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the greatest gift you could give your child, right? No matter what. So the greater significance that that might carry for you is maybe the greater gift that you then give to your kids because of it, you know? And what a win all the way
Yeah.
around. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
your story with me and for taking this time in the middle of the holidays to just
That's
share so openly. I
mystery.
really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for tuning in. Together we can shape healthier paths for families to do divorce better. See you next time on In Between Them.